Finding out my wife was cheating on me with my boss should have been the end, but instead, it was the start of a plan that left them both wishing they'd never crossed me. My name's Jake, I'm 35, and I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 8 years. On the surface, we had what most people would call a great marriage, steady jobs, a nice home, and the kind of relationship where people would say, you two are perfect for each other. Emily is smart, charming, and can talk her way out of just about anything. Maybe that's why I fell for her so hard back when we met. But lately, things haven't felt right. At first, it was just little stuff, you know. Things that don't scream trouble on their own, but start to pile up. Emily's always been a private person, but she began acting even more guarded than usual. She'd get these texts late at night and would tilt her phone away from me when she read them. I'd ask her what was going on, and she'd just laugh it off, saying it was her sister or a friend from work. She'd say, Jake, you're being paranoid. I wish you'd stop trying to spy on me, and then she'd give me that playful smile, like I was being ridiculous. About 3 months ago, things between me and Emily started to change. She became more distant, like her mind was always somewhere else. Our late-night talks turned into awkward silences, and the physical intimacy that practically disappeared overnight. When I'd try to initiate, she'd have some excuse ready, tired from work, a headache, or just not in the mood. I told myself it was just a phase, that she was probably stressed about something and it would pass. But deep down, I felt like I was losing her, and I didn't know why. The thing is, Emily's always been good at hiding her emotions. She could be going through hell and you'd never know it, not unless she wanted you to. But even she couldn't completely hide the fact that something was off. I could see it in the way she avoided eye contact when I'd ask how her day was, in the way she'd find reasons to stay out late, saying she was meeting a friend or working on some project that just couldn't wait. And every time I'd question it, she'd have an answer, delivered so smoothly that I almost believed her. Almost. A couple of weeks after I started noticing things were off with Emily, I got a call from Steve, my boss. He was hosting one of his usual dinner parties at his place that Saturday and wanted to invite me and Emily. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Steve did this every couple of months, inviting a few of us from work over for a casual evening. He'd have his wife, Karen, there, and they'd make it feel like a small, friendly gathering. Just a few couples, a few drinks, and Steve playing the perfect host. Hey, Jake, you and Emily are still coming this Saturday, right? He asked, his voice full of that easygoing charm. Karen's already planning the menu, and you know she'll be disappointed if you two bail. I hesitated for a moment, thinking about how distant things had been with Emily lately. But maybe this was just what we needed, a chance to get out of the house, relax, and maybe reconnect. Besides, we'd been to Steve's dinner parties a dozen times before, and they were always fun. Nothing fancy, just a few laughs, some wine, and a chance to unwind. Yeah, of course, I said, forcing a smile into my voice. We'll be there. The rest of the week went by in a blur of work and routine. Emily didn't mention the dinner party until the night before, when I casually brought it up. I half expected her to come up with an excuse not to go, but to my surprise, she seemed almost eager. Oh, right, Steve's party, she said, a strange flicker of something in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Saturday rolled around, and we drove over to Steve's house. It was a nice place, big but not pretentious, with a wide porch and lights strung up in the backyard. Steve's wife, Karen, was already buzzing around the kitchen when we arrived, preparing appetizers and making everyone feel at home. Steve greeted us at the door, all smiles, and ushered us inside with that easy, confident charm of his. Jake, Emily. Glad you could make it, he said, clapping me on the back before turning to give Emily a friendly hug. Karen's got a killer roast in the oven, and I've got a bottle of that Merlot you like. Go on, make yourselves comfortable. As we walked in, I noticed another familiar couple, Matt and his wife, Julie, already mingling by the bar. Matt was one of my colleagues, a good guy who always managed to keep things light, even when work got stressful. We exchanged greetings, and for a while, it felt like any other night at Steve's. The kind of night where you could let your guard down, share a few stories, and forget about the stress of work. But there was this strange undercurrent that I couldn't quite shake off. Emily was more talkative than she'd been in weeks, laughing and joking with everyone, but there was something about her laughter that felt forced. Like she was trying too hard. And every now and then, I'd catch Steve glancing at her, just a quick, subtle look, but it was there. I'd never paid much attention to it before. Steve had always been a bit of a flirt, but nothing that ever crossed a line. Or at least, that's what I used to think. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was nothing to worry about. But I couldn't help feeling like there was something happening just beneath the surface, something I wasn't seeing. As the night went on, that feeling only got stronger. I just didn't realize how right I was. Dinner was going smoothly, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. We had all settled at the table, enjoying Karen's delicious roast, the wine flowing, and the usual small talk about work, weekend plans, and everything in between. It felt almost normal, like one of those rare nights where you can just let your shoulders relax and forget about everything else. At some point, Emily excused herself to go to the bathroom, and Steve got up a moment later, saying he was heading down to the cellar to grab another bottle of wine. "You're going to love this one, Jake. It's a special pick," he said with a grin before disappearing through a door off to the side. The rest of us stayed at the table, laughing at one of Matt's jokes, and I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept drifting. I was still feeling that weird sense of unease, like there was something just out of place, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Minutes passed, and Emily still hadn't come back. I glanced down the hall, expecting to see her heading back to the table, but there was no sign of her. I tried not to think too much of it. Maybe she'd gotten a call or was touching up her makeup. But the longer she was gone, the harder it was to ignore the little voice in the back of my head whispering that something wasn't right. I looked over at Karen, trying to keep my tone casual. "I'm just going to check on Emily," I said, forcing a smile. "She's been gone for a while." Karen's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read, and she gave me a strange, almost knowing smile. "Oh, of course, Jake. The bathroom's just down the hall, to the left," she said, her tone light. "I'm sure she's fine." I nodded and got up from the table, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. As I walked down the hall, the sound of the dinner conversation faded behind me, replaced by the soft hum of the house. I followed Karen's directions, but when I reached the bathroom door, it was slightly ajar, and the lights were off. I pushed it open, half expecting to see Emily inside, but the bathroom was empty. No sign of her. I stood there for a moment, confused, my mind racing. Where could she have gone? I thought about heading back to the table, but something stopped me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this, something I needed to see for myself. So, I kept walking, glancing around as I moved through the hall, past a few closed doors that I knew led to Steve's office and a guest bedroom. As I turned a corner, I noticed a faint light coming from the end of another hallway, one that led toward the back of the house. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but my feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the light. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I'd find Emily sitting on the porch or maybe having a quiet moment to herself, but there was something about the way Karen had smiled at me, the way she had almost encouraged me to go looking, that made my stomach twist. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but as I got closer to that light, I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to like it. As I walked down the hall toward the faint light, I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Emily had to be around here somewhere, probably just stepped out to get some air, and I'd find her any moment. But when I reached the end of the hall and pushed open the door, the room was empty, just a cozy little den with a lamp glowing softly in the corner. No sign of Emily. No sign of Steve. I stood there, feeling a mix of confusion and frustration. Where were they? I thought about going back to the table and pretending everything was fine, but something in my gut told me to keep looking. I remembered Steve had mentioned he was going to the wine cellar, so I decided to check there. It was in the basement, down a narrow set of stairs at the far end of the house. As I descended, I could hear the faint hum of the cooling system, and my heart started to beat faster. The air was cooler down there, and a dim light was spilling out from under the cellar door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me didn't want to open it, didn't want to see what was on the other side. But I knew I had to. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me felt like a punch to the gut. There, in the middle of the dimly lit cellar, was Steve, and he wasn't alone. He was on top of Emily, his hands all over her, her dress hiked up around her waist, and her shirt hanging open. They were so wrapped up in each other they didn't even notice me standing there at first. I felt like my mind was split in two, one part screaming at me to look away, and the other unable to tear my eyes from the scene. "Emily!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the cold stone walls. Steve jumped, his head snapping around, and his eyes went wide when he saw me. For a split second, no one moved, like we were all frozen in time. Then I lunged forward, grabbing Steve by the collar and shoving him off her. He stumbled back, nearly losing his balance, and I could see the shock and fear in his eyes. "What the hell, Jake," he started, but I didn't let him finish. "Isn't one wife enough for you, Steve?" I spat, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disgust. "Or do you just get off over people who trust you?" Emily scrambled to pull her dress down, her face flushed, but it was like she couldn't even look at me. She tried to stammer out some excuse, but I didn't want to hear it. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave, and all I could think about was how stupid I had been, how completely I had trusted both of them. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the cellar, my hands trembling. I could hear Steve calling after me, his voice cracking, trying to explain, but I didn't care. I was done with him, and I was done with Emily. I marched back up the stairs, my mind a blur of anger and disbelief. As I reached the dining room, I saw the rest of the guests still seated, laughing, chatting, completely unaware of what had just happened. "Hey, Jake, you find her?" Matt asked, grinning, clearly trying to make light of my little search. But his smile faded when he saw the look on my face. I didn't bother easing into it. "Yeah, I found her," I said, my voice cold and flat. "She was downstairs, in the wine cellar. With Steve." I paused, looking around the table, making sure everyone was paying attention. Half naked, underneath him. The room went silent. Matt's jaw dropped, and Karen, Steve's wife, just sat there, blinking as if she didn't quite understand the words that had come out of my mouth. The air was thick, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for someone to say it was all a joke, a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. I had seen it with my own eyes. I could have walked out of that house and never looked back. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the need for answers, or maybe I just wanted to see how this whole mess would play out. Either way, I found myself back at the dining table, sitting down and waiting for the storm I'd just unleashed to hit full force. As soon as the words left my mouth, Karen, Steve's wife, shot up from her chair. For a moment, she just stood there, her face pale, her hands trembling as if she was trying to decide whether she'd actually heard what I'd said. But then, like a switch flipped, she snapped into action and stormed out of the room, heading straight for the cellar. The rest of us just sat there in stunned silence, listening as her footsteps echoed down the stairs, and then, there it was. A loud, shrill scream that sent chills down my spine. Karen's voice, filled with pure rage, echoed through the house, and then we heard the slaps. Sharp, clear, and unrelenting. It was like a slap of reality, waking everyone up from whatever illusion we'd been living under. "You disgusting piece of..." I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. "How long has this been going on, huh? In my house?" And then, more slaps, followed by a desperate murmur that must have been Steve, trying to explain himself. I could only imagine the pathetic excuses he was fumbling through. I glanced around the table. Matt and Julie, the other couple, looked as shocked as I felt. Julie's face had gone pale, and Matt just kept shaking his head, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd just heard. They exchanged a quick look, and then, without saying a word, they stood up, grabbed their coats, and slipped out of the house. I didn't blame them. No one wants to be around when someone else's life is falling apart. The shouting continued for another few minutes, and then we heard Karen's voice, loud and commanding. "Get out. Both of you." There was a pause, then I heard footsteps, Steve and Emily, trying to shuffle past her, probably still half-dressed, humiliated, and scrambling to avoid any more of her wrath. The front door opened and then slammed shut, leaving the house eerily quiet. I just sat there, staring at the half-empty wine glass in front of me, trying to process everything. My boss. My wife. Cheating. Together. It felt like my entire world had been flipped upside down, and I was left trying to piece it all back together. A few minutes later, Karen came back into the dining room. She looked different, tired, drained, like she'd just fought a battle and wasn't sure if she'd won. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair a little disheveled, but she was composed. She didn't say anything at first, just walked over to the wine bottle, poured herself a generous glass, and sat down across from me. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two strangers who had suddenly found themselves in the same sinking boat. Then she took a long sip of her wine, set the glass down, and sighed. "So," she said, her voice low and almost calm, "I guess we both had a pretty interesting night, huh?" I didn't know how to respond to that. What do you say to the woman who just caught her husband cheating with your wife? I could still hear the echoes of her slaps, the way she had screamed at them. I'd wanted to do the same, to shout, to rage, but I couldn't. I just felt empty. "I'm sorry," I finally said, though I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for. For dragging her into this? For not stopping it sooner? For being too blind to see what was right in front of me? Karen gave me a sad, weary smile. "Don't be. It's not your fault. Looks like we both trusted people we shouldn't have." She took another sip of her wine, her eyes distant, as if she was trying to make sense of everything. "I've been married to that man for 15 years, you know. 15 years. And now, I'm not even sure who he is anymore." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I thought Emily and I were solid. Sure, we had our problems, but I never thought she'd. I mean, with Steve of all people. Karen let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, guess that's why they call it betrayal. If we saw it coming, it wouldn't hurt so much." She looked down at her wine glass, swirling the liquid around. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly, looking up at me. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Leave, I guess. I can't. I can't go back to her after this." Karen nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "Yeah. Me neither." She finished her wine, then set the glass down with a quiet clink. "But you know what? I'm glad you said something. I would have kept living that lie, thinking everything was okay. So, thank you, for that." We sat there for a while, just drinking and talking, two people who had been blindsided by the ones they trusted most. It wasn't exactly a comforting conversation, but it was real. And for that moment, that was enough. Karen and I sat there for a while, sharing that strange, bitter solidarity you only find when you've both been betrayed in the worst way. As the wine flowed, so did our anger. It was like the more we talked, the more the shock began to wear off, replaced by a steady, simmering rage. We didn't ask for this, but we were left with the mess, and neither of us was the type to just walk away without a fight. After a while, Karen set her glass down, her eyes narrowing with a look of fierce determination. I'm not letting Steve get away with this, she said, her voice low but sharp. He thinks he can just cheat on me, humiliate me, and then carry on like nothing happened. No. I'm going to sue him for everything he's got, the house, the car, the business. He's not going to walk away from this without losing everything. I looked at her, surprised but impressed. There was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, a kind of strength that made it clear she wasn't playing around. You're serious? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You're going to take him for everything? Oh, I'm dead serious, she said, leaning forward, her lips curling into a cold smile. I've put up with his lies and his nonsense for too long. But this? This is the last straw. I'm going to make sure he regrets ever thinking he could get away with this. I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make them pay for everything they'd put us through. What can I do to help? I asked. Because I'm done playing nice. If there's a way to wipe my wife into dust, I'm all in. Karen's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and understanding. Well, Jake, if you're willing to get your hands a little dirty, I think we can come up with something. And that's when the real planning began. Karen was a smart woman, and I could see why Steve was always so careful around her. She knew how to strategize, how to think 2 steps ahead, and she was already putting together a plan to make Steve's life a living nightmare. First, I'm going to file for divorce, but not just any divorce. I'm going for everything, full financial disclosure, a detailed breakdown of all assets, and I'll make sure he can't hide a single cent. I've already got a lawyer who's good at this sort of thing, and believe me, she's ruthless. I nodded, my mind racing. Good. He deserves it. But I want to do more than just take my wife for what she's worth. I want to ruin her, make sure everyone sees her for who she really is. I paused, thinking. She's always been so careful, always hiding things. What if we exposed her? All the lies, everything she's been keeping from me, from everyone. Make it impossible for her to just slip away and start over. Karen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. How do you plan to do that? Well, I have access to her accounts, her emails. I've been paying attention for weeks, and I've already seen a few things that don't add up. Maybe I could dig a little deeper, find something that would make her sweat. And if I can catch her in a lie or two, well, let's just say she won't be able to run from this. I paused, glancing at Karen. But I need help. If I'm going to bring her down, I need to make sure she doesn't see it coming. Karen's smile widened, and there was a dark glint in her eyes. I like the way you think, Jake. Here's what we'll do. I'll keep Steve distracted with the legal battle, make sure he's too busy trying to save his own skin to pay attention to anything else. You focus on Emily. Dig up whatever dirt you can find, and we'll use it to destroy her reputation. If she thinks she can walk away from this unscathed, she's got another thing coming. It felt good to have a plan, to have a purpose, even if that purpose was revenge. For once, I didn't feel powerless. I was angry, yes, but I was also focused, and I had Karen right there beside me, just as determined to see this through. We spent the next few hours talking, mapping out every step, every angle we could use to make their lives a living hell. We were done playing nice, done pretending to be the victims. Now, it was our turn to strike back. Here's to revenge, Karen said, raising her glass with a wry smile. And to making sure they pay for everything. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. To revenge, I said, taking a long sip. Let's make sure they regret ever thinking they could play us. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I didn't know how this would all play out, but I was ready for whatever came next. Steve and Emily had thought they could get away with their betrayal, but they had underestimated the one thing that would be their downfall, 2 people who had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain by bringing them down. With our plan in place, Karen and I wasted no time. We were done sitting around and stewing in our anger. Now, it was about action. We both had our parts to play, and we were determined to make Steve and Emily pay for every lie, every betrayal, every bit of humiliation they had put us through. Karen was the first to strike. The very next morning, she filed for divorce, but not before she'd done her homework. She had gathered every piece of financial information she could find, from bank statements to business records, making sure there was no way Steve could hide any assets. She was going for everything: the house, the car, and most importantly, his stake in the business. I could tell Steve didn't see it coming. He was blindsided when he got served, and suddenly, he was scrambling. Karen had played her part perfectly. She hired one of the toughest divorce attorneys in town, someone who wasn't afraid to dig deep and find every dirty little secret Steve thought he had buried. And while he was busy trying to save himself from losing everything, it gave me the perfect opportunity to focus on my own revenge. I started by going through everything I could access: Emily's emails, her social media accounts, her text messages. It didn't take long for me to find exactly what I needed. Emily had been careful, sure, but she wasn't as good at hiding things as she thought. I found emails with Steve, making plans to meet up in hotels, sneaking around during office hours. But that wasn't all. I found conversations with other men, too. She had a pattern, and she had been cheating on me long before Steve entered the picture. Armed with this information, I went a step further. I hired a private investigator to gather more concrete evidence, things I could use to make sure there was no denying what she had done. Photos, recordings, everything. And as much as it hurt to see it all laid out like that, it gave me exactly what I needed to move forward. The first part of my plan was to expose her for who she really was. Emily had always been good at maintaining a certain image: sweet, charming, the perfect wife. I wanted to rip that mask off. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, put it into a neat little package, and sent it to a few select people. Close friends, family members, people she had lied to and manipulated. I wanted them to see the real Emily, to understand just how deep her deception went. But I didn't stop there. I created a fake account on social media, and anonymously posted some of the incriminating messages, leaving out just enough details to protect myself but enough to make it clear what she had been up to. It wasn't long before people started talking, and the whispers grew louder. Emily's carefully crafted image was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. With her reputation already taking a hit, it was time to focus on hitting her where it would hurt the most: her finances. During the divorce proceedings, I made sure to push for every bit of compensation I was entitled to. I proved that she had been using our shared accounts to fund her little escapades, and I wasn't about to let that slide. Emily thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, but I made sure that wasn't the case. She ended up having to pay back a significant amount, and her lawyer fees quickly began to pile up. Between the legal battles, the loss of friends, and the strain of trying to manage everything, she was falling apart. I could see it, and I took a dark sense of satisfaction in knowing she was finally feeling even a fraction of the pain she had caused me. Karen and I kept in close contact throughout all of this. She had her own war to fight, and she was winning. Steve was struggling to keep his head above water, trying to balance the legal fees with the damage control of his business. Karen's lawyer was relentless, digging into every shady deal Steve had ever made, making sure that when the dust settled, she would come out on top. And she was determined to take his business, too. The final part of my revenge was simple but effective. Steve's company was hosting a major client event, a high-profile dinner where he hoped to secure a deal that would help stabilize everything he was losing in the divorce. It was his last shot, and he was desperate to make it work. Karen and I knew this, and we used it to our advantage. I still had connections through work, so I managed to get access to the guest list. Then I sent out an anonymous tip to a few key people on that list, hinting at Steve's infidelity and the scandal surrounding his messy divorce. The night of the event, whispers were already flying, and people were looking at Steve with a mix of pity and judgment. Karen and I made sure the right people knew just enough to question whether they really wanted to do business with him. The deal fell through. Steve lost one of his biggest clients, and without that, his company was left floundering. Karen had her victory, and I had mine. A few weeks later, I got a call from Karen. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I could tell from her tone that she had good news. "It's done," she said, a note of finality in her voice. "I got the house, the car, and a big chunk of the business. Steve's trying to save face, but he knows he's lost. He's scrambling, but it's over." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. "Good," I said. "I'm glad. You deserve it." "And you?" she asked. "How are things with Emily?" "I think it's safe to say she's finally feeling the consequences of her actions," I replied. "I don't know where she's living now, but I heard she's struggling to keep up with the payments." "It's a start." We both shared a moment of silence, a sense of satisfaction washing over us. We had been hurt, betrayed, and humiliated, but we hadn't just sat there and taken it. We had fought back, and we had won. "Here's to never letting anyone make fools of us again," Karen said, raising a glass over the phone. "Cheers to that," I replied, clinking my own glass, even if she couldn't see it. We had both found a way to turn our pain into power, and it was the most satisfying victory I could have hoped for. After the dust had settled, life took a turn I never could have predicted. Karen had followed through on everything she'd promised. With the divorce finalized, she took control of Steve's shares in the company, and just like that, she became the new head of the business. It was a bold move, and it sent ripples through the office. Everyone was talking about it. Some people were shocked, some were impressed, but no one could deny that she had earned it. I'll admit, I wasn't sure what would happen with my job. After everything that had gone down, part of me wondered if I should just quit and start fresh somewhere else, far away from the reminders of Steve and Emily's betrayal. But Karen, true to her word, made it clear there was no reason for me to leave. "Jake," she said to me during one of our first meetings after she officially took over, "I know everything that happened was a mess. But none of that changes the fact that you're one of the best players we've got here. I don't want to lose you because of what Steve did. I need people I can trust, people who can get things done. And I know you're that guy." It was strange, sitting across from Karen in Steve's old office, knowing she was now the one calling the shots. But it felt right, like everything had come full circle. She wasn't just a replacement for Steve, she was a breath of fresh air, someone who genuinely cared about the company and the people who worked there. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "I've always loved working here, and I'll do whatever it takes to help this place succeed. We've both been through enough, and it's time we made something good out of it." Over the next few months, we worked together, building the company back up. Karen proved to be a natural leader, smart, decisive, and, most importantly, fair. She didn't let Steve's old ways dictate how things ran, she had her own vision, and it was clear she knew exactly how to make it happen. And she didn't forget about me, either. She knew how much effort I'd put in over the years, and she rewarded that hard work. One day, she called me into her office. I'd been promoted before, but something about this felt different. Karen had a way of making people feel seen, and she looked at me with a genuine smile as she slid a letter across the desk. "I've been thinking about this for a while, Jake. You've been here longer than most, and you've proven yourself over and over. I want you to take on a bigger role, a promotion, if you're willing to accept it." I picked up the letter, and as I read the details, I felt a mix of surprise and gratitude. She was offering me a senior position, a major step up from where I was. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, still trying to process it. "I mean, it's a big responsibility." Karen nodded. "I'm sure. You've earned this, Jake. You've always been a good player, and I know you're more than capable of handling it. Besides, I need someone I can trust by my side, someone who knows how this place works inside and out. I can't think of anyone better. I accepted the promotion, and from that moment on, things just seemed to fall into place. Working with Karen was a completely different experience from working under Steve. She was straightforward, no nonsense, but also willing to listen. She respected my input, and in turn, I gave her everything I had. It felt like we were rebuilding the company together, turning it into something better than it had ever been before. We started to see the results almost immediately. Karen's leadership brought in new clients, and her no-nonsense approach made sure everyone was held accountable. Morale improved, and the office started to feel less like a battleground and more like a team. It was refreshing, to say the least, and I found myself enjoying my work in a way I hadn't in a long time. Karen and I developed a solid, professional relationship. We didn't need to talk about what had happened with Steve and Emily, it was unspoken, but always there, a reminder of how far we'd come and how much we'd both had to endure. But we used that experience to push us forward, to build something stronger. We understood each other in a way that went beyond boss and employee, and that made all the difference. Looking back, it was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. I'd gone from feeling like my entire life was falling apart to finding a new sense of purpose, all thanks to a partnership I never could have anticipated. Karen wasn't just my boss, she was someone who had been through the same hell I had, and together, we had found a way to turn that pain into something positive. In the end, revenge was just the beginning. We'd both needed to see Steve and Emily face the consequences of their actions, but the real victory came from picking up the pieces and building something better. And with Karen at the helm, I had no doubt that we were going to succeed. As for Steve, my ex-boss, he didn't disappear entirely. Word got around that he'd managed to find himself another woman not long after Karen had kicked him out and taken over the company. It wasn't surprising, guys like Steve always seemed to land on their feet, finding someone else to cling to. But it was clear that he wasn't doing nearly as well as he had been when he was at the top. He'd lost his business, his marriage, and a lot of his connections. Now, he was just another guy trying to rebuild, but without the power he once had. And then there was Emily, my ex-wife. I'd be lying if I said I never thought about her. I still remember the way she had tried to lie her way out of everything, even when the truth was staring her in the face. But after everything had come out, after her reputation had been shredded and she had to confront the reality of what she'd done, I moved on. I never reached out to her, and she never tried to contact me. I figured she thought she'd still have Steve to lean on, that once everything settled down, they'd be together. But that's not what happened. Steve, being the man he was, had no intention of sticking around. As soon as his life started to crumble, he dropped her. Just like that. Emily had thrown away our marriage for him, and he didn't even bother to stay with her. When he moved on to someone else, she was left on her own, trying to pick up the pieces of a life she had shattered. I heard about it through mutual friends. Apparently, Emily didn't see it coming. She'd thought she and Steve would weather the storm together, but he turned his back on her, leaving her to face the mess she'd made alone. It was poetic, in a way. She'd tried to use him to escape, to find something more exciting than our marriage, and he'd used her right back. In the end, they both got exactly what they deserved. Looking back, it's strange to think about how everything unfolded. I never could have imagined that the people I trusted most would betray me in such a cruel way. But I also couldn't have predicted how much I would grow because of it. I found strength I didn't know I had, and I found a partnership with Karen that was more fulfilling than anything I had before. Now, I wake up every day feeling like I'm in the right place. I'm not haunted by what happened anymore. I've moved on, and I'm stronger for it. Steve is out of the picture, and Emily is just a memory, a reminder of what happens when you let lies and deceit guide your life. As for Karen, she's proven to be an incredible leader and a true ally. We're both moving forward, focused on the future, and leaving the past where it belongs. We may have started out as two people who were wronged, but we turned that pain into something powerful, and we're making sure we succeed on our own terms. In the end, I learned that you can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. And when life knocks you down, sometimes the best thing you can do is get up, dust yourself off, and start building something even better.